A handful of activities in life come with a mercy rule. Mixed martial arts is one of them. Those strikes and knockouts take the headlines. A well-executed submission is without a doubt a thing of beauty, the perfect blending of brain and brawn. Let's look at some of the best submissions in the history of MMA. Kazushi Sakuraba vs. Renzo Gracie. The greatest Japanese mixed martial artist of all time, the Gracie Hunter, is a living highlight reel. Debatably, the greatest moment of Sakuraba's career is maybe his win over the legendary Renzo Gracie at Pride 10 in the summer of 2000. At the very least, the win marked one of the best submissions in MMA history, although he had stunned the world by beating Royce Gracie in the Pride Grand Prix opening round in May of the same year. He had defeated the all-time great by way of nasty leg kicks. Before defeating the world's best-known Gracie brother, Sakuraba had submitted Royler Gracie in November 1999. But there was no way that Renzo would suffer the same fortune. Or at least that was the thought ahead of the fight. Renzo was one of the most famous practitioners on the planet and appeared too strong for the Japanese hero. But that's precisely what happened, and Sakuraba's patient work was rewarded when he locked in the Kimura with over 9 minutes of the second round on the clock. Renzo tried his greatest to escape, but there was no way out. Instead of tapping, he stayed in until his arm snapped under Sakuraba's grip. A legendary fight ended with one of the most impressive submissions in mixed martial arts history. Nick Diaz vs. Takanori Gomai. The world was hoping for a striking fest between Nick Diaz and Takanori Gomai at Pride 33. After all, both were famous for their stand-up than anything else. Of course, Diaz would go on to become a Cesar Gracie black belt, but it was his pressure boxing style that made him appealing to fans around the world. Now, when deliberating the greatest submission of all time in MMA, we had to just add this one to the list. Not only was Diaz's execution of the super rare Gogo Plata as slick as it was effective, but it also took many fans and practitioners in disbelief, given how rare it is. A major reason for its rarity inside the cage is that it's also one of the toughest submissions to master in BJJ. Even though it is difficult on paper, this is a very effective submission. The go-go is performed from the rubber guard by putting the shin bone over the throat of the opponent. The intention is to apply pressure to the windpipe, which eventually shuts off the opponent's airflow. Diaz nailed it, getting a place on the highlight reel of the best MMA submissions of all time. Even if the fight was claimed a no contest due to the Stockton fighter testing positive for marijuana, it's still iconic. Demetrious Johnson vs. Ray Borg. Johnson's flying armbar in October 2017 was his final win in the UFC before he hooked up with one championship in 2019. As one of the greatest mixed martial artists of all time, the American has celebrated a career littered with remarkable finishes inside the cage. But perhaps the best of them all came against Ray Borg at UFC 216, where he landed the most unbelievable submission. Having worked Borg over for much of the fight, it looked as though the bout would go the distance, but Johnson took Borg's back and raised him into the air, shifting from suplex to armbar before landing on the canvas. If this is not the most spectacular submission of all time, it must be up there with the very best. Fedor Emilianenko vs. Fabricio Werdum. Whenever the greatest MMA submissions of all time are brought up, it should not take long before this one is mentioned. Sure, the scale of the win was heavy enough to punch a hole in the earth. Yet the technical news behind Fabricio Werdum's incredible submission win was also huge. In many ways, it destroyed the commonly held belief that high-level jiu-jitsu had little place in the heavyweight realm. When Werdum toppled the unconquerable Last Emperor in just over 1 minute, it changed many things. For example, it snapped the Russian's lengthy win streak that was approaching 9 years. It also marked the beginning of the end of his elite career. And you could also reason that it sent more striking heavy fighters to the mat than any other victory in the early to late 2000s. It's difficult to reconstruct the amazement of watching the baddest man on the planet tapping to Werdum's triangle choke. But to say it was a surprise was an understatement. Although the Russian great was able to slip out of the first one, when Werdum caught him deep in his second attempt, his technical brilliance saw him through. Anderson Silva vs. Chael Sonnen. This is the fight that had it all. This was an action-packed scrap that looked as though it was fated to end as one of the biggest shocks in the history of the UFC. Silva, who was pretty much thought to be unbeatable at the time, was outclassed by Sonnen across 5 rounds. The underdog was mere seconds away from leaving the octagon a hero and establishing himself as the new UFC middleweight champion. But that dream rapidly turned into a nightmare when the spider trapped Sonnen in a triangle like a fly in a funnel web. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed it. Until next time.